Hi, I'm Stephanie, and I'm a certified personal trainer.
Hi, I'm Kate, and I'm a registered dietitian nutritionist.
And this is a podcast dedicated to educating women on their journey to optimal health. There's so much that we can do to optimize our health, but we've talked to so many women who just simply don't know how.
These conversations are what inspired us to start Omnia Fit. The Omnia Fit podcast is all about interviewing certified professionals to educate women on improving our health. We'll talk about things like stress relief through exercise, what we need to know about our hormones, the truth behind fad diets, and more. So subscribe, follow along, and let us know if there are any topics you want to hear more about.
Hi everyone, and welcome to today's episode of Omnia Fit. I'm speaking with C. Anderson today, who is a licensed therapist, author, speaker, and all-around expert in mental health. And today, in regards to mental health, we are really specifically focusing on self-care and why it is so important. Specifically, how self-care is not a selfish thing to do, and in fact, it is so necessary for our mental health. So I'm sure there's a lot of people who need to hear this, myself included. I took a lot from even just recording this conversation, so I'm so excited to share it with you now. Hi, C. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Stephanie, for having me.
I am so excited to have this conversation with you, especially as we come to the end of the year. People may be starting New Year's resolutions or just taking care of their families and not really focusing on themselves. So I am so excited to dive into this topic around mental health and taking care of yourself. So I would first love to just start off with you giving an intro of yourself, your background, what you're really passionate in, or even just why you're so passionate about this topic.
Sure. So I am a native Washingtonian, and I now live in the South, and I attended graduate school concentrating in clinical mental health, psychology, and counseling. And so it actually found me. I wanted to be an orthodontist. Funny enough, that did not happen. And when I came into contact with a really awesome professor in college, I ended up changing my major as a result and decided that this was the work that I wanted to do. Now I understand that the work was actually already almost preordained for me and my path in this life, because I am so passionate about people finding ways to make life easier, but also just more manageable. And mental health is certainly the cornerstone of a healthy lifestyle. And so anytime I get the opportunity to talk about it and to talk about simple but impactful ways to improve one's mental health, I jump at the opportunity.
Absolutely love it. And that's funny that you started off and you said orthodont.
So I was pre-dental, and
Yeah.
it was boring. It was just not my thing. And I was like, surely this can't be life. And so I
Yeah.
started looking elsewhere, talking to different people. And I was like, oh, so there's a thing called psychology, and this is what they do. And this totally fits with my personality and who I am. And I'm going to go down this road.
That's amazing. And even when we spoke earlier, you do have a couple other niches that you work in, but as you just mentioned, you jump on the opportunity to talk about mental health. Why is that specifically just so important to you, especially in regards to women?
Well, what I've found is that women tend to take on more of society's burden. And what I mean by that is that women are socialized very differently than men, at least in our culture in America. And so we are socialized and raised to be the nurturer, to be the giver, to be the person that always takes care of everyone else, everything else, despite our own needs, and certainly not taking care of ourselves first. So we don't usually prioritize ourselves. And so I was getting so many women that were coming in, and they were trying to hold life together, work together, being a parent together, being a partner together. And I thought to myself, wow, we usually put ourselves at the bottom of the list. So why is that? And so I found this really great thing called self-care, which was not popular 10 years ago. And I thought, this is what women in particular need to know and understand and be unapologetic about. And so I made it my mission to really teach women, share with women, and connect with women on a level that spoke to their core.
Yes, and I love that phrase where you said being unapologetic about it
Mm-hmm.
because leading into the stereotype of, as you mentioned, women are the nurturers and we tend to take care of other people. We also overly apologize for things even when
Mm-hmm.
we didn't do anything
Yes.
wrong,
Yes.
including taking care of ourselves.
That's such a good point. We do. It's almost like our value is assessed based upon the amount of sacrifice that we can make, right? The amount of self sacrifice that we can make. So the more you freely give of yourself and put yourself last, and the less that you do for yourself, the more womanly, the more motherly, the more caring, the more nurturer, the more valuable you are in society. And it's really to our detriment.
Yeah, there's even been a lot of things that I've been reading about just women in the professional world, how it's very common to, men stereotypically get asked about their profession or how they grew or their leadership techniques or, anything else related to business. Professional women a lot of times get asked about balancing family life or if they feel guilty about, leaving their children or
Mm-hmm.
not taking care of the household. So society, as you mentioned, totally puts us in that bucket of
Mm-hmm.
inviting us to take care of people and incentivizing that even more already than we do ourselves, it seems like.
It does. It's very real. And so I see women, mostly in my practice, mostly women, but some men and some who identify as non-binary. But when I look at women who very much identify with the traditional female roles in this country, they are almost always on my couch because they can no longer sustain the roles that they've been forced into, and they are fearful. I mean, incredibly fearful of walking away and trying to find happiness, peace, and joy because of the disdain and because of the negativity that we face for choosing us over other things.
And that is so interesting. Would you mind digging in a little bit deeper to what you mean by that with the disdain and negativity of the choice of choosing ourselves? Like what do those conversations look like when you talk to women about that?
So usually those conversations, they start off with, I'm caring for my children. I'm trying to be supportive of my husband. I have my own goals, my own desires and dreams that I'm also trying to implement or explore or cultivate. And then there's usually some other issue where maybe they're taking care of an ailing parent or they're trying to be supportive of additional family members. And they're like, well, if I put any of these things down, I am going to deal with an incredible amount of guilt. People are going to talk badly about me. People will say that I'm not a good person. I'm not a good woman. I'm not a good mother. I've also seen situations where women have made very similar choices to men to not be a parent, to have their children raised by the other parent. But when women do it, because with men it's kind of expected. Like if you have a single parent household and it's run by a male, it's very different than if you have a single parent household that's run by a woman, right? It's like, oh, she's a single mother. But when you see a situation where a mom has made a decision for herself not to be a mother or not to be a wife or not to be in this very traditional role, the vitriol almost is damaging to one's self, one's identity, one's ability to be at peace with their own decisions and usually the decisions that they make for themselves. And that on top of the stress of not making the decision just compounds the stress even more, makes it almost unbearable. So you know what they decide to do? They just decide to leave things as is. I'll just muddle through, whatever happens, happens. But at least I'll be lauded as this amazing woman who did everything for everybody and gave the shirt off of her back. And that is what it will be.
Which that's so sad that is the quote unquote easier option, the
Mm-hmm.
lesser of two evils. Just trudge through and take it on
Mm-hmm.
versus stand up for what you believe in. That's insane to me. What is some generalized advice? I know it's probably so difficult because
Mm-hmm.
every situation is so unique, but what's the general advice that you give to women who are struggling with this?
So Of course, like you said, it's very nuanced, it's very layered because everyone is different. But one of the things that I encourage women to do is think about how you want to be remembered, what you want your legacy to be. Do you want to be this self sacrificing person where people go, oh, she worked herself to the bone? She gave her last to everyone. She did everything for everybody, and nobody truly know who you are. You not even know who you are. So what is the legacy that you want to leave on this earth? If you had a month left of life, what would you do differently? And of those things, what can you start doing differently today to find some level of balance, equilibrium, and fulfillment without living in a space of fear of backlash? And so taking those very small steps is sometimes the key that unlocks the door to self-actualization and true fulfillment.
Yeah. And you mentioned balance in there, and in prior you mentioned self-care, and I know those kind of go hand in hand of being able to take care of yourself. But a common phrase is you can't pour from an empty cup, and it sounds like this is all tying into that type of concept. Could you explain kind of your advice for creating that balance and taking care of yourself? Maybe that's the same thing, maybe those are two different questions.
Right. So first, before you can even create a self-care plan, which has many different facets to it, you have to identify what your limitations are. So often we can't even implement self-care techniques because we are living beyond our limitations. And so if you know that working full time is something that is very draining or difficult for you, maybe you want to find an opportunity to lessen the hours that you work full time. Or if you know that your limit is two children and you feel like you're at capacity, you might want to have a conversation with yourself and be honest, and a conversation with your partner about whether or not you want more children. Or if you're in a career or whatever it is that you do, identify what your limitations are. Once you're able to identify limitations, then you know what you're working with. So essentially, when you have that boundary, then you're able to give within that boundary more freely. So when you identify the boundary, the limitations on the things that you're able to do, the things that you're able to give, then you can look into implementing some self-care practices.
And that has got to be easier said than done because, including conversations with myself, it is so easy to say, "Oh, you know what? I can handle this. I can do multiple things." So what? And of course, we know that's not realistic, but it's easy to tell yourself that, right?
Yeah, because like who doesn't want to be able to juggle it all and to feel accomplished in that way? I think everybody does. But that's also tied to, again, how we're socialized to do everything, to be everything to everybody, and to be able to say, I'm great at all the things that I do. I do 5 different things and I'm superior at each one of them. And we are addicted to accomplishment and productivity.
Yes, and I can totally relate with that because I am one of those, even if it's not, at least I know myself, not trying to show off or the superiority, but it's
Mm-hmm.
the why not? I can do it. I've been able to
Mm-hmm.
handle it, work so many hours, and I tell myself that, and I think I can, and then I go on vacation and I pass out and I sleep for like 12 hours a night, take naps, and I'm
Yeah.
exhausted once I finally get myself to slow down. So it's, you can tell yourself that, but like, can your body actually handle that?
Right. It's like in your mind, the concept says that's possible. But you have to remember that anytime we do a task, we are engaging so many parts of ourselves. We're engaging our mental energy, our physical energy, our heart energy, right? The part of us that's very passionate and really cares about the thing that we're doing. And that is very taxing on one's body, on one's self. And so we have to put it into realistic terms and say, okay, here's what I can certainly do, and here's what may be outside of my ability or my capacity at this time, so that we don't continue to find ourselves in these places of exhaustion, right? Meaning that you have nothing left. Everything has been used up. You never want to get yourself into a place where all of you has been used up and you have to replenish yourself from the negative.
Right, because as you said before, it's you have to be honest with yourself, and that was a key word that I
Mm-hmm.
love that you threw in there. Like I said, so much easier said than done. But if you're not, or even be honest with yourself, it may feel sustainable if you've been doing it for a week, but
Mm-hmm.
how sustainable is it really if if this is the decision you're making to commit to for months or years, depending on what the commitment is. So
Yes.
just being truly, truly honest with yourself.
Yeah.
And a lot of people think they're being honest with themselves, but they're not.
No, and some of that comes from not being taught healthy boundaries and how to implement those boundaries. Phrases that you can say, things that you can convey to other people that you feel good about, but that also is respectful of other people. So things like, oh, at this time, I'm unable to. At this time, I'm at capacity. Check back with me, at a later date, and that's okay, right? It's okay for you to be able to convey that, because let's say you obligate yourself to something, someone, or something, and you end up not doing as well in whatever that thing is that you've obligated yourself to. And then the person who was expecting you to perform at a level of 8 is getting level 5 because you're stretched. You've overexerted yourself. So rather than try to do all things, saying, at this time I won't be able to, but check back with me next month. Or how about this instead of that? Here's what I can do while I can't do what you've asked me. Here's what I am able to do. Does that work for you? Those things are totally okay to be able to protect yourself.
Right. And I love that you gave examples there of ways to say no, because I know that's even conversations I've had with my own therapist of, well, I know I shouldn't do this and I'm being real with myself, but how the heck do I tell someone no? Which is also a ridiculous question that a lot of women even think how do I say no?
Mm-hmm.
You can say no, just don't do it with some attitude and sass. And so yeah,
Yeah.
I love that you just gave some examples of ways to say, or no, not right now, or check back in a few weeks,
Uh-huh.
or yeah.
And people respect transparency. People respect honesty because you don't want to overpromise and underdeliver. And whatever that thing is, work, family, whatever it is. The other part that is important is people will usually will understand that people that have an attitude or that give you pushback or try to guilt you into doing that thing, those are people who likely didn't respect your boundaries from the beginning. And so you putting those in place is causing them to feel like, oh, well, I can't manipulate you anymore, or I can't get what I want in this interaction, right? So when you do start to say no and you do start to put yourself first and prioritize your own well-being, the people who really didn't care about your well-being or who put themselves first already, you will know who they are immediately.
That is such a good point because that's the story so many women tell themselves of if I say no, this person won't like me or I'm
Mm-hmm.
not going to do as well or whatever the story may be.
Mm-hmm.
But I love how you just put it in perspective of if person doesn't respect your boundaries, if they don't respect you, then that's a sign of do you want to be doing things for this person anyway? Do you want to, it might be a little different if it's your boss,
Mm-hmm.
but maybe then it's time to reassess what, where you're working if it's
Mm-hmm.
possible. But yeah, it's, flipping the table of if you say no in a respectful way and
Mm-hmm.
someone doesn't take it well, that's their problem, not
Yes, you are
yours.
not responsible for holding other people's emotions. You're not responsible for carrying other people's baggage. And then even you gave a great example, like you mentioned, a boss, right? A work scenario. I remember one day it was so interesting. I had 3 women that came in. They all had the same issue where they were performing really well at work, high productivity, and they were tired. And I told them, I said, what happens is when you get a task that is in addition to whatever your job is, or they keep piling stuff on, and you keep succeeding at it, even if inside or after work you are exhausted and you have nothing left, as long as you continue to do the work that they're asking you to do, you continue to succeed at the pile of things that they've asked you to do, they're going to think that you can do it and continue to give you work.
Yes, my best friend is actually in this situation right now with work. They're refusing to hire other people to help her out because she's been able to continue getting work done on salary, not hourly, so not getting time and a half for working more than 40 hours and pull in 50-hour weeks. And she keeps saying, no, I'm not going to put in the hours to get this done, because if I continue to accomplish these things, the higher ups are not going to understand that, why they need to hire someone else, because the things are getting done on the budget that, on a lower budget. So why would they get her some help?
Correct. That is exactly what I'm speaking about.
So then let's assume someone has had the tough conversations with themselves, maybe most likely hiring a therapist to help them with it. Lord knows I needed that help.
Don't we all?
Someone to call you on your bullshit and say, no, let's really reassess. So let's say someone's had those conversations, has, said no and lightened up their plate a little bit. When you say self-care, you mentioned that it's not just like the bath salts and massages, though those are absolutely great, absolutely be in your self-care routine. You mean so much more than that, right?
Yes, I do. And I love a good massage, and my bath time is amazing, right? But that's part of what we call physical self-care. Those are the physical activities that you can do that help your physical self, right? So like getting the tension out of your body through something like Reiki or massage or touch therapy, those kinds of things, taking a walk, getting sleep, staying hydrated. The other aspects of self-care also include social self-care, right? Social self-care is when you are tending to the part of us that was created for connection. So maybe you're going to have some time with your friends, or you're going to have a date, or you make time to contact family on a regular basis. Those are the social self-care aspects. And then also the emotional, right? So like you mentioned a few moments ago, Stephanie, you mentioned seeing a therapist, being able to do things like journal, being able to do things like meditation. And then that leads us into spiritual self-care, which is the meditation, if you go to a place of worship, if you like to commune with nature, if that's a part of what you do, the self-reflection, those kinds of things. And then mental self-care. What are the things that stimulate your mind, that kind of get your juices flowing, that pour into your own intellect? Is it reading a book? Have you not had time to sit down with a really good book? Right? Is it doing things like going to a museum, finding out new information, writing, those kinds of things? So we are multidimensional beings, and so we require multidimensional approaches to taking care of our full and total self.
Yeah, and I love that you gave examples there, because one of my next questions, and you can absolutely still answer this, a little bit more of a personal question that maybe a lot of people can relate to. I am totally guilty of being one of those people where once I have time to sit down and relax, I have some mindless games on my phone that I'll play or scroll through social media, and sometimes that's my like personal self-care and dates and friends, some of the things you mentioned in all the different categories. But sometimes I just have free time to myself and I think I don't know what to do, so I'm just going to work some more. There's always so I don't know if you have advice for someone like me or even just myself.
Sure. So I have fallen in love with the power of quiet. Here's a bit of my own story. So I grew up in an environment that was very unpredictable. And sometimes when that happens, you try to stay busy and you try to do things that can kind of control the way that things are. And that leads into adulthood of busyness equaling safety, right? And so I had a really difficult time being able to sit in quiet, to be still without being distracted or stimulated by something, social media, television, having music on if I was in the car, having music on if I was cleaning or cooking and things like that. But in the last year or so, and in my own inner and self work, I've started to really, really tap into the power of hearing absolutely nothing, of having absolutely nothing before my eyes, of just sitting quiet and connecting with my body, connecting with emotions that may be coming up for me that maybe I didn't realize, positive, negative, neutral. I've been able to start, to meditate more because that takes practice. I talk to people all the time. They go, I tried to meditate, but I couldn't turn my brain off. Well, guess what?
Yeah.
Your brain is so used to being stimulated all the time that you have to retrain your brain. And this is when we get into neuroplasticity. You have to retrain your brain to not need stimulation all the time in order for you to feel okay. So the power of quiet, it is phenomenal.
That was a perfect answer, because as I'm thinking about it, I'm thinking, I get those quiet times to myself, and my first thought isn't, "Ooh, this is nice. Let's soak it up and enjoy it." It's, what do I got to do? What can I do? What is so? All right, adding of goals for for myself.
Yeah, and a really easy way to start that, even if meditation is difficult for you. Guided meditation is helpful if you're just starting, because you can hear someone talking. You can do whatever they're guiding you to do in the meditation, or you can go outside. If you're in the country, if you're in the city, in an apartment, you can go on your balcony and close your eyes and simply just listen and think about what you're hearing. So some days I'll just kind of sit in my back, on my back patio. I can listen to cars that are far away. I can listen to birds. I can listen to, there's lots of lizards here in Alabama. I can tell when there's a little lizard creeping, on my patio. I can even sometimes hear what's going on inside the house. I can hear my heartbeat. So I kind of tune into what are all the different sounds around me that I'm hearing. And so it gives me an opportunity to be still. And then sometimes I'll purposely go into meditation and I don't hear a thing. I'm somewhere else completely. So it really depends on what works for you. But please, please, please don't underestimate the power of quiet. Even if you put your phone on an alarm or timer for 2 minutes, and for that 2 minutes, you just sit, and you can sit with your eyes closed, and you can sit quietly. And just for that 2 minutes, just see what happens.
It almost sounds like taking baby steps towards working. Like you mentioned, meditation is a practice, and not a lot of people can just immediately start off with a 30-minute quiet meditation and be great at it. So it sounds, even if there's some sort of mind stimulation, like you mentioned, the listening to the sounds or listening to a guided meditation or some sort of stimulation, it's different stimulation than stressful stimulation or your typical work or whatever else is, occupying your mind space. But just taking those baby steps, working towards a practice of meditation, not just,
Correct.
I think a lot of people assume you would jump right into a 15-20 minute.
Right. And you know what happens when you attempt to jump into a 15 or 30-minute meditation, you go, oh my God, this is horrible. I'm never doing it again.
Yeah.
And you don't go back to it. So yes. So 60 seconds, 2 minutes. Don't underestimate the power of that, just because it's like, oh, I can do a minute, I can do 2 minutes. When you have your timer on and you're like, oh my goodness, 2 minutes is a really long time.
Yeah. And so we talked about meditation. What are some other big self-care practices that are really important to you to really hit home outside of meditation? Because I know you mentioned emotional self-care, social, even financial, I know can be in there. What other major forms of self-care would you recommend or you talk about the most, maybe?
Let's see. Well, for me, because I'm very extroverted, for me, being connected with individuals who vibrate really high is important to me. And so I try to be very thoughtful in how I spend my time, who I allow access into my own energy, whether it be my mental, emotional. There are some times where I will not answer calls. I will not return DMs, because if it requires emotional or mental labor and I'm at capacity, you will hear from me some other time. I will not respond. And so being very mindful of what I lend my energy to is on my list of top 3.
And you're not a bad person for not answering that email or that phone call right away.
I am not.
I know I've also struggled with that too.
No, I am not. And one of the things that I actually had a conversation with someone earlier, and I said, oftentimes we give and give and give because we feel like, oh, this is what makes me a good person. When really giving on a continual basis is sometimes you not feeling like you're worth prioritizing yourself over everything else.
Yeah. So, a lot of the self-care can be done ourselves, but therapy we talked about it several times, about me and my own therapist. You have, of course, talked about your clients. When would you recommend someone reach out to a therapist? And then, maybe you specifically, how does a therapy session or an initial, for someone who's never met with a therapist before and might be a little nervous, what does that look like for them?
Sure. So you can go to see a therapist at any time. You do not have to be in crisis. You do not have to have experienced any trauma. It doesn't have to be a situation where things are happening around you and you're feeling down or negative or anxious. You can feel perfectly okay and decide to see a therapist and talk about anything that you desire to talk about. The other thing that people don't usually realize is that therapists aren't only there to help people through really difficult times, but they're also there a lot of times to help navigate new pathways. So if maybe you got a new job, you're in a new relationship, you're in a new marriage, you're a new parent, there's ways that you can find support for balancing all of what you have to do. There are things if you're considering a change, right? So, or even a life development change. So it doesn't have to be crisis. It doesn't have to be something that's been painful that sends you to therapy. It can totally be a part of your regular self-care to have an unbiased, a non-judgmental, and a sounding board in private. That's the most important thing. This is private and confidential conversations that can do a world of good and help you maintain even the great spaces in your life.
Yeah, I'll also add there. It is just, I mean, I'm also an extrovert, so I don't know if this is mostly for extroverts, but I also just love an hour of, like you said, non-judgmental time to just talk about whatever the hell I want. Probably the dumbest things or the most random things that I want to complain about, or it's just nothing at all that, in the
Uh-huh.
past I talk about in therapy. But sometimes I'll take a whole hour on the smallest little details that I just need to get off my chest or talk about. And I know my boyfriend appreciates it too.
Yes.
Talking to someone else about it.
Yeah. So it's like this really safe vault where you can say some of the things that kind of you wouldn't want to say to anybody else, just to kind of
Yeah.
get it off your mind and say it out loud. And that's helpful. It's really helpful because a lot of people, unfortunately, use social media as an opportunity to almost journal and say things that are on their minds. And it's probably not the safest space to do so. And so a therapist is like, hey, I'm here. This time is yours. We can discuss whatever it is that you want to discuss and it be safe and healthy.
Yeah, it is. And that non-judgmental aspect goes really strongly in there with the social media. There is a lot of judgment on social media.
Mm-hmm. There is a
So,
lot.
and so is there something that you would love to hit home, or maybe something that we didn't talk about in regards to mental health or speaking with a therapist or self-care?
I will say that your self care, particularly if you're going to see a therapist, it should be as usual, as common, as normalized as going to get a haircut, going to get your nails done, having maintenance done on your vehicle. It doesn't have to be something that is stigmatized or that's shameful or that means that something is wrong. It actually is a sign that you are doing what's best for you and that you're on the road to being healthy or maintaining your current level of health. So, as simple as it would be to go in to get a cup of coffee, it is really that simple to go in and speak to a therapist and get what you need.
And I'll add to that, my best friend always, when she was convincing me to go find a therapist, she said, "You go to a doctor for your physical health. Why in the world would you not go to
Mm-hmm.
a professional for your mental health, which is arguably way more complicated than your physical health?"
Yes, I agree. And you have a great friend.
She's a smart one. But yes, hallelujah to everything that you said. 100% agree. And so if people are loving this conversation and want to hear more from you, I know you're probably only licensed in certain states to work with people
Mm-hmm.
directly,
Correct.
but if people want to reach out, or I know you're very active in the media, what's the best way for people to get a hold of you, follow you, get more of your wonderful advice?
Sure. My Instagram, if you have questions or you want to be put in touch with someone in your state, I have different websites and directories that I often refer people to. If you have a question or comment, my social media on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram is C Anderson Live, and that's CE Anderson LIVE. And then my website is candersonlive.com, and you can also send messages or find out what's coming up on my webpage.
Perfect. And I will be sure to link all of that in the show notes.
Awesome.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, C. This was such a great conversation.
Thank you. I enjoyed it. And anything that you need, Stephanie, I think the podcast is awesome, and I'm happy to support.
Thank you so much. I'm hoping that these all reach people in all the right ways, and kind of like you were saying, with even just meeting with a therapist, destigmatizing some of these ways to optimize our health and all the different forms of health. So thank you for that.
You're welcome.
All right, have a good one.
You too.